You're going to adore the new retirement facility. They offer needlework workshops." Rachel's grin was as artificial as her false lashes. Mark nodded like a trained dog while Kevin silently calculated the profits they'd gain from liquidating my assets. I simply smiled and agreed, saying it sounded like a marvelous plan. But inside, something broke irreparably. They had selected the most prestigious bistro in town for this performance. The tablecloth was pristine linen, the crystal stemware caught the amber evening glow, and the scent of fresh shellfish permeated the space. Everything was flawless for an emotional assassination, all orchestrated to appear like a celebration when it was truly my burial, and I remained breathing. "Mom, we realize you've been somewhat disoriented recently." Mark pressed on, his tone heavy with false worry. He wore a charcoal suit I had purchased for his university commencement. Now he utilized it to enter me. Disoriented, that term pierced me like a blade. I had fabricated some lapses in recall to evaluate their devotion, their affection. I wanted to discover if my offspring would attend to me when I genuinely required them. The response sat before me, adorned in the emerald gown I had presented to her. "Dr. Patterson indicates it would be optimal," Kevin fabricated, evading my stare. "A supervised setting, expert attention, programs created specifically for individuals your age, individuals my age," as though reaching 76 had transformed me into another species, something that no longer merited regard or respect, as though a lifetime of constructing a property empire from nothing signified nothing. "And the needlework workshops are genuinely healing," Rachel interjected, touching my hands with fingers that seared with deceit. "You can create tablecloths, shawls, practical items. While they were dividing my assets like scavengers over a fresh carcass, I would be creating tablecloths in a chamber that reeked of antiseptic and hopelessness. "When would the relocation occur?" I inquired, maintaining my tone as placid as a pond before a tempest. "Tomorrow," Mark responded far too swiftly. "We've already arranged everything. You simply need to authorize some documents and what will become of my assets." The quietness that ensued was so dense I could taste it. They exchanged glances like youngsters discovered pilfering from the dessert container. Rachel cleared her windpipe and Kevin manipulated his cloth until it nearly shredded. "Don't concern yourself with that, Mom," Kevin ultimately stated. "We'll handle everything. It's excessive responsibility for you presently." Excessive responsibility. The identical assets I had acquired, refurbished and administered for generations were abruptly excessive for me. The identical ventures I had expanded from an initial $5,000 to the $1.5 million I possessed now suddenly necessitated younger intellects. That evening I feigned consuming the sedatives Rachel had provided me. I expelled them into a tissue when she wasn't observing. I required complete alertness for what approached. At 11 o'clock I detected their voices in my culinary space. They assumed I was deeply unconscious. A lethal miscalculation. "The coastal property is valued at no less than $300,000, Mark murmured, rearranging documents on my oak table, the table where I had authorized my initial property agreement 40 years prior, and the city apartment, another $200,000, not to mention the holdings in the financial institution. "We must act swiftly," Rachel whispered, dispensing champagne into glasses I had gifted them for their celebration before she comprehends what's transpiring. Kevin chuckled, that merciless laugh he had cultivated after wedding her. "Comprehends? Are you joking?" She inquired what hour it was thrice yesterday. "A fabrication." I had simulated that bewilderment to evaluate them to discover how much of my own blood had transformed to venom. The response scorched in my abdomen like corrosive. "Examine this," Rachel proclaimed, flourishing a document I identified as my testament. "Once she's in the facility, we can contend mental incapacity. The attorney is already prepared. $400,000 for the principal residence," Mark computed, recording figures in a journal. $300 for the coastal property, $200 for the apartment, and the holdings total another $600,000, nearly $1.5 million collectively. $1.5 million, the product of a lifetime of labor, sacrifice and intelligent choices. They had computed it to the final cent while I was supposedly sedated in my own chamber. "And the finest aspect," Kevin appended with a grin I could detect from my bedroom, "is that she'll never comprehend what all of this is genuinely valued. She believes it's merely some properties. They entirely miscalculated me. They presumed I was a bewildered elderly woman who didn't comprehend figures or commerce. They didn't realize that every dawn I examined my holdings, that I knew the precise worth of each asset, that I possessed strategies they couldn't even commence to envision. At 5 in the dawn, while they recuperated from their intoxicated treachery, I adorned myself in my finest black trousers ensemble. I collected only the fundamentals, my identification, the ornaments I had concealed in a secret container, and the access to a secure compartment in a financial institution in another municipality. In that container were the records that would transform everything. The cab arrived punctually. The operator assisted me with my compact luggage and posed no inquiries. At the terminal, I acquired a single-direction passage to a shoreline municipality where I possessed an asset they knew nothing about. During the journey, I closed my vision and recalled my mother's statements. Elizabeth, never completely trust anyone, not even your own offspring. Blood can be tainted, but dignity is perpetual. She was correct, and I was about to demonstrate to them that a 76-year-old woman could be more dangerous than any adversary they had ever envisioned. The aircraft descended in a municipality I hadn't explored in 30 years. Coastal Haven, Georgia, a designation my offspring had never detected me, articulate, because some narratives are too valuable to distribute with those who don't merit them. The saline atmosphere struck my countenance like a reminder of recollections. This was where it had all commenced. This was where I had acquired my initial asset with the life reserves from my occupation as a secretary. $5,000 that appeared like a fortune in those days. $5,000 that had expanded into the empire my offspring wanted to pilfer from me. The cab transported me through avenues I identified despite the transition of time. The tropical trees remained there, elevated now, their branches murmuring secrets to the breeze. The vintage Southern-style residences preserved their quaint appeal, though some had been refurbished with that soulless contemporary style. "Is this the correct location, ma'am?" the operator inquired, halting before a golden residence with jade wooden panels. "Appears like no one's resided here for an interval." I smiled for the initial occasion in days. "It's flawless." The residence appeared to be resting, as if anticipating my return. It was modest compared to the assets my offspring knew, but it possessed something none of the others had: a genuine history. It had been my confidential sanctuary, my contingency strategy that I had maintained quiet for generations. I extracted the access from my handbag. My hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from sentiment. The entrance opened with a familiar creak, like a welcoming exhale. The interior smelled of aged timber and ocean sodium. The furnishings were covered with ivory sheets, creating spectral figures in the faint illumination. I walked gradually, eliminating the coverings one by one, revealing treasures I had departed there like seeds, anticipating the appropriate moment to germinate. In the culinary space, I discovered the initial surprise. On the table was a note written in an unsteady but familiar script. "Mrs. Anderson, I've been anticipating you all these years. Sarah." My heart skipped a rhythm. Sarah had been my housekeeper for 15 years until Mark and Kevin determined we no longer required her. "It's an unnecessary expenditure, Mom," they had stated. "We can assist you with the residence." Another fabrication. They simply wanted to dominate every aspect of my existence, including who could or couldn't be near me. I detected footsteps on the front veranda. My heart pounded so intensely I thought it would burst from my chest. The entrance opened gradually, and there she was. Sarah, 30 years older, her hair completely ivory, and her countenance etched with lines that narrated stories of a life well lived, but with the identical warm vision I recalled. "I knew you'd arrive," she stated simply, as if only days had transpired instead of generations. "When I detected what your offspring were strategizing, I knew you'd discover a method to reach here." "How did you comprehend about my offspring?" Sarah smiled sadly. "Rachel contacted me a month prior. She desired information about your assets, about any financial accounts you might have concealed. I informed her I didn't know anything. Of course, Rachel had been investigating. It wasn't adequate to pilfer what they knew about. They wanted to ensure there were no concealed treasures. The irony was delicious. They had contacted the one individual who genuinely knew all my secrets, and she had protected me. But I did know," Sarah persisted, approaching me with gradual but steady steps. "I knew about this residence. I knew about the records you maintained here. I knew about your strategies, and I've been attending to everything, anticipating this day." My vision filled with tears. I couldn't restrain. For the initial occasion in months, someone was observing me like a complete individual, not as an impediment or a source of currency. "The records are secure," Sarah murmured, collecting my hands in hers. "I examined them every month. I ensured they didn't deteriorate. Your strategy is still intact." I had commenced designing it 30 years prior, when I comprehended my offspring, saw my assets as their guaranteed inheritance, not as the outcome of my intense labor. I had created a protective web so intricate that not even the finest attorney could easily unravel it. "Where are they?" I inquired, my tone barely a murmur. Sarah guided me to a rear chamber I didn't recall. It had been converted into a modest office with metal filing containers and a modest secure embedded in the partition. "The combination is still identical," she stated, indicating to the secure, "your husband's birth date. My beloved Thomas. He had departed 10 years prior, but his wisdom persisted to protect my future. Never place all your investments in one basket, Elizabeth," he used to state, "and never permit anyone else to dominate your destiny, not even your offspring." I opened the secure with hands that no longer trembled. Inside were all the records I had concealed for generations, deeds to assets my offspring didn't know existed, holdings in international financial institutions, a completely different testament from the one they had photographed, but the most significant thing was a thick folder marked with the initials HC, Haven Community. "Do you recall your vision?" Sarah inquired, observing me as I examined the documents. "You wanted to establish a location where older women could reside with respect, where they wouldn't be treated like burdens or nuisances." Of course I recalled. It had been my confidential obsession for years. A residence for women my age who had been abandoned by their families, betrayed by their offspring, or simply forgotten by a society that discards anyone who no longer produces currency. "Everything is prepared," Sarah persisted. "The permits, the architectural plans, the resources set aside specifically for this venture. It simply required you to return to activate it." Tears streamed down my countenance uncontrollably. For months I had sensed my existence was disintegrating, that I had lost all purpose. But here was the evidence that I had always possessed a larger strategy, a mission that transcended my offspring's pettiness. "Is there anything else?" Sarah stated, extracting a cellular device from her handbag. "Mr. Harrison has been anticipating your contact. Mr. Harrison, my trusted attorney, the only professional who knew the complete extent of my strategies. I had employed him in confidentiality 5 years prior, compensating him with resources from accounts my offspring would never discover." "Is he still dependable?" I inquired, though I already knew the response. More than ever, his own offspring attempted to have him committed last year. "He comprehends exactly what's transpiring." I collected the device with renewed determination. It was time to commence the next phase of my strategy, the phase that would transform my apparent defeat into the sweetest victory of my existence. I dialed the number I had memorized years prior. Mr. Harrison responded on the second ring. "Elizabeth." His tone sounded relieved and excited. "I knew you'd contact today. Are you prepared to commence?" "More than prepared, Mr. Harrison. It's time to remind my offspring who I genuinely am. Everything is arranged for tomorrow," Harrison stated over the device, his tone filled with a satisfaction I could sense through the line. "Your offspring have scheduled a family assembly for 10 o'clock in the dawn at your residence. They presume they're going to authorize the documents to transfer your holdings." I smiled as I observed the ocean from the window of my confidential sanctuary. The waves crashed against the rocks with a fury I comprehended perfectly. "Who will be there?" "Mark, Kevin, Rachel. And they've also invited Nathan, your older sibling. Apparently they want family witnesses to make everything appear legitimate and transparent." Mr. Harrison chuckled ironically. "The attorney they employed will also be there, a Mr. Thompson, who has a reputation for being, let's state, ethically flexible. Nathan, my older sibling, who had always envied my success in commerce. Ever since I inherited the family residence 15 years prior, he had attempted multiple occasions to convince me to liquidate it and divide the currency. Of course he would be there like a scavenger smelling a carcass. And our strategy? Flawless. I'll arrive at 10:30 when they're all assembled and sensing confident. I possess all the original records, the recordings we made last year, and the special surprise we prepared." The special surprise? A video I had recorded 2 years prior when I sensed this day might arrive. In it I explained my reasons in detail, my genuine strategies, and revealed secrets about my offspring that they presumed were buried forever. "Sarah will be with me," I appended, observing my faithful companion who was preparing coffee in the culinary space with the ease of someone who had never departed. "She possesses information that will be very enlightening. The more credible witnesses we possess, the superior. Are you certain you want to do this? Once we commence, there's no turning back." I thought of Rachel's artificial grin, Mark's fabrications, Kevin's greed. I thought of the years I had sacrificed to construct a future for offspring who only saw my death as a commercial opportunity. I've never been more certain of anything in my existence. That evening, Sarah and I remained awake late, reminiscing about vintage times and strategizing the future. She informed me what her existence had been like after my offspring terminated her. "I obtained an occupation with a family in the municipality," she recounted as we consumed herbal tea. "But I never ceased thinking about you. Every month I'd arrive to examine this residence to ensure everything was in sequence for when you returned." "How did you know I would return?" "Because I know you, Mrs. Anderson. You're not one to surrender. And because 5 years prior, when you commenced suspecting your offspring, you inquired me to maintain this confidential. You informed me, if I ever disappear, search for me here initially." She was correct.
I had commenced to sense the treachery years prior, when I noticed strange glances between my offspring, conversations that halted when I entered a chamber, inquiries that were too specific about my finances. "There's something else you should comprehend," Sarah persisted, her expression transforming serious. "3 months prior, Rachel arrived to see me. She didn't simply want information about your assets. She also inquired about your mental health, about whether I had noticed any indications of dementia or bewilderment." My blood ran cold. "What did you inform her?"
I informed her you were the sharpest woman I knew, that your intellect was like a steel trap. She became very upset when I didn't provide her the response she was anticipating. Of course, they required to construct a case of mental incapacity to justify their theft. They had strategized every detail of my destruction, from the sedatives to the repeated inquiries about the hour. But there's more. Sarah stood up and brought a modest container from the closet. "I discovered this in the refuse at your residence, the day they terminated me." She opened the container, and my heart halted. Inside were all the letters my husband Thomas had written to me while we were courting. Affection letters I had treasured for 50 years. Letters that had mysteriously disappeared from my chamber last month. "They discarded them," Sarah murmured as if they were refuse. "Affection letters from your husband treated like waste." I collected them with trembling hands. The aged paper still held the faint scent of the cologne Thomas used to wear. Every letter was a recollection, every statement a promise fulfilled, and my offspring had discarded them as if they possessed no worth. Why would they do this? Because anything that represents genuine affection bothers them, Sarah responded with a wisdom that comes from years of observing human nature. Your affection for your husband, your generosity toward them, your labor constructing a future, all of it reminds them of what they are incapable of sensing. That evening, I couldn't rest. I reread every one of Thomas's letters, recalling the man who had loved me for who I was, not for what I possessed. He had constructed the initial commerce with me, celebrated every success, and comforted me in every failure. "Elizabeth," he had written in one of his final letters, "you are stronger than you think. If I'm ever gone, recall that your worth isn't in what you possess, but in what you provide. And if anyone ever attempts to take that from you, you fight. Fight with all the fury of a woman who knows her worth. My worth." For months I had permitted my offspring to make me sense useless, bewildered, incapable. I had performed the role of the vulnerable elderly woman because a portion of me wanted to believe they would protect me. But Thomas was correct. My worth didn't depend on their affection or regard. It depended on me. At 8 o'clock in the dawn, Mr. Harrison contacted to confirm the final details. "Your offspring are very nervous," he reported with amusement. "Apparently they've been contacting the authorities all evening, reporting you missing." "Missing? Of course. I'm supposed to be senile and bewildered. Recall, a woman in my condition can't simply disappear without assistance. They're constructing the case that someone kidnapped or manipulated me." The irony was flawless. While they were reporting my disappearance as a victim, I was orchestrating my return as an avenger. "Are you prepared?" Mr. Harrison inquired. I observed my affection letters. I observed Sarah laying out my finest black gown. I observed out at the ocean that had witnessed my initial visions. I had spent 76 years learning who I genuinely was. It was time to teach them the most significant lesson of their existences. I'm prepared to reclaim what's mine. The drive back felt like a triumphal procession. Sarah sat beside me, silent, but as steadfast as a guardian. Mr. Harrison followed in his vehicle, carrying the records that would transform everything. And I adorned like the executive I had always been prepared for the most significant commerce assembly of my existence. The assembly where I would teach my offspring the difference between a helpless elderly woman and a woman with 76 years of experience destroying those who underestimate her. The cab halted a block from my residence. I could see several vehicles parked out front. Mark's charcoal sedan, Kevin's ivory luxury car, and an unfamiliar vehicle I assumed belonged to the corrupt attorney they had employed. Nathan's crimson truck was also there, confirming that my sibling had arrived to join the feast. "Are you certain you want to do this?" Sarah inquired for the third occasion, though her vision shone with a determination that stated otherwise. More certain than ever. Mr. Harrison had arrived 10 minutes before us, and was anticipating in his vehicle, examining the records one final occasion. I walked up to his window and he rolled it down with a grin that promised justice. "Everything's prepared," he stated, showing me a digital recorder. "I possess the confessions we recorded last year when you suspected this might transpire. I also possess the certified copies of all the genuine records, not the forgeries they presume exist. Recording the confessions had been my idea, a kind of insurance against the treachery I sensed was approaching.
In those recordings, Mark and Kevin openly admitted they were anticipating for me to die to inherit, that they considered my assets theirs by right, and that they saw me as an annoying impediment to their strategies. And the video loaded and prepared. When the moment arrives, I'll press play, and their own statements will destroy them. I walked toward my residence with steps that echoed like hammer blows on the pavement. It was strange to see my own residence as adversary territory, but that was exactly what it had become. The invaders had collected my castle, believing the monarch had fled forever. A lethal miscalculation. I rang the doorbell of my own residence. The symbolism was flawless. They had collected my existence so completely that I had to request permission to enter my own residence. Rachel opened the entrance. Her countenance went through a fascinating sequence of sentiments: surprise, fear, rapid computation, and ultimately that artificial grin I knew all too well. "Elizabeth, my God, we were so worried," she exclaimed with an award-worthy performance. "Where have you been?" "We contacted the authorities, examined hospitals." "I was thinking," I replied simply, walking into my residence as if seeing it for the initial occasion, and making some significant choices. Mark came running from the living chamber, followed by Kevin and Nathan. Their countenances showed a mixture of relief and panic that was delicious to observe. "Mom, you had us worried sick," Mark stated, attempting to embrace me. I stepped back gently but firmly. "Worried about me or worried about your strategies?" I inquired in a placid tone. The quietness that ensued was so dense I could sense it pressing against my skin. Kevin cleared his windpipe nervously, while Rachel exchanged quick glances with Mark. "I don't know what you signify," Kevin muttered, but his tone trembled in a manner that gave him away completely. "I presume you know exactly what I signify." Just then, Mr. Harrison knocked on the entrance. The attorney they had employed stood up from the eating chamber table where they had distributed all the documents for the fraudulent transfer of my assets. "Who is it?" inquired Mr. Thompson, a modest man with a facial hair, who appeared as nervous as my offspring. "My legal representative," I announced, my tone cutting the atmosphere like glass. "George Harrison, specialist in elder fraud and asset protection." The color drained from my offspring's countenances. Nathan collected a step back, clearly regretting his involvement in this farce. Mr. Harrison entered with Sarah at his side, carrying a briefcase that I knew contained the complete destruction of their strategies. He introduced himself cordially to Mr. Thompson, who immediately commenced to sweat profusely. "Mrs. Anderson," Mr. Harrison stated formally, "I comprehend there are some records that necessitate your authorization to transfer your assets to your offspring." "That's correct," I confirmed, observing as Mark attempted to regain his composure. "Flawless. But before we proceed, I require to verify some legal details." Mr. Harrison opened his briefcase and extracted a thick folder. "For example, I require to confirm that you are mentally competent to make this choice." "Of course, she's competent," Rachel interjected far too swiftly. "It's simply that sometimes she gets a little bewildered because of her age." "Intriguing." Mr. Harrison smiled like a predator that has smelled blood. "Because I possess here a very recent medical report from Dr. Martinez confirming that Mrs. Anderson is in excellent mental health and possesses complete decision-making capacity." I extracted the report from my handbag. I had obtained it 2 days before my disappearance, anticipating this exact situation.
"I also possess here," Mr. Harrison persisted, "some very intriguing recordings that were made in this very residence exactly 1 year prior." The color completely vanished from my offspring's countenances. Mark gripped the back of a chair, as if he were about to faint. "I don't know what you're articulating," Kevin fabricated, but his tone was barely a murmur. Mr. Harrison pressed play on his recorder. Mark's tone filled the chamber with crystal clarity. "Let's simply hope she dies soon. I'm tired of feigning I care. As soon as she's in the ground, we liquidate everything and divide the currency." Kevin's tone followed. "All we require is to discover a method to declare her incompetent. After that, it'll be easy to collect control of everything." And ultimately, Rachel's tone. "She's simply a stubborn elderly woman. If she doesn't cooperate, we'll place her in the cheapest facility we can discover, and that's that." The quietness that ensued was sepulchral. Nathan observed me with genuine horror, clearly comprehending what kind of conspiracy he had stumbled into. "Those recordings are extracted out of context," Mark stammered. But there was no conviction remaining in his tone. "Out of context?" Mr. Harrison chuckled without humor. "I possess 3 hours of similar recordings, all made with your mother's knowledge and consent, as she has suspected your intentions for years." Sarah walked to the table and assembled all the artificial records they had prepared. She examined them one by one with the authority of someone who knew every detail of my genuine documents. "These records are fraudulent," she announced. "The authorizations are forged, and several of the holdings mentioned here don't even exist in the official records." "That's impossible," protested Mr. Thompson. But he was already packing his things, clearly wanting to flee the situation. "It's very possible when someone has been strategizing to rob their own mother for years," I stated ultimately, my tone filled with an authority that had been dormant for too long. "And it's especially possible when that mother is much more intelligent than you ever envisioned." Mr. Harrison then extracted the envelope containing the video I had recorded 2 years prior. The video where I revealed not only my genuine strategies, but also some secrets about my offspring that would destroy them completely. Now, I stated, sitting at my own table like the executive I had always been, "It's time to converse about the consequences of betraying the woman who provided you existence." Their countenances were flawless portraits of absolute terror, and I was simply commencing. "Sit down, all of you," I ordered in a tone that permitted no argument. "It's time for you to detect some truths you've been evading for years." Mark, Kevin, and Rachel settled into their chairs like students being punished. Nathan remained standing, clearly uncomfortable with his involvement. Mr. Thompson had attempted to slip away, but Mr. Harrison had discreetly blocked his exit. Initially, I commenced, pacing before them like a prosecutor before a jury. "Let's converse about genuine figures. You believe my estate is valued approximately $1.5 million? I saw them exchange nervous glances. They had done their computations in confidentiality, believing I possessed no idea of the genuine worth of my assets. "You're off by more than $3 million. The quietness was absolute. Even Sarah observed me with surprise, though she knew I possessed secrets within secrets. "My genuine net worth," I persisted, savoring every second of their shock, "including the assets you don't know about, the international holdings and the commerce I've been administering discreetly for generations, exceeds $5 million. Rachel transformed as ivory as a sheet. Mark gripped the arms of his chair as if the world were shaking beneath him. $5 million. Kevin murmured, his tone breaking. $5.2 million to be exact. Currency you presumed you could pilfer while I was performing with needlework in some deplorable institution. Harrison opened his laptop and projected a presentation onto the partition. It was a detailed summary of all my assets, holdings, and financial accounts. The figures appeared one after another, each figure hitting my offspring like a financial slap in the countenance. Principal residence appraised at $600,000, coastal residence at $450,000, municipality apartment at $300,000. But that's simply the commencement. The following slides revealed assets they had never envisioned. 2 apartments in Atlanta, a modest inn in Savannah, holdings in growth resources, shares in 3 technology corporations, and accounts in financial institutions in Switzerland and Panama. How? Mark couldn't finish the inquiry. How did a senile and bewildered woman administer to accumulate such a fortune without you noticing? I smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had been strategizing this moment for years. Very simple. You completely underestimated your mother. Sarah came forward and placed an additional folder on the table. There are also the commerce Mrs. Anderson has been running discreetly, a property consultancy, 2 investment firms, and the venture that matters most to her. What venture? Rachel inquired, her tone strangled. This was my favorite portion, the moment I revealed the vision I had been secretly constructing for a generation. The Haven Community, I announced, observing their bewildered countenances, a residential and service complex for older women who have been abandoned by their families, women whose offspring see them as burdens instead of human beings. Mr. Harrison transformed the slide, and a spectacular architectural rendering appeared. A beautiful complex with gardens, a library, art workshops, medical clinics, and dignified apartments for 200 residents. The land is already acquired, I persisted. The permits are approved. Construction commences next month. And you, my dear offspring, have simply become the primary inspiration for this venture. I don't comprehend, Kevin murmured. Every occasion you treated me like a useless elderly woman. Every occasion you conversed about me as if I were a piece of vintage furniture. Every occasion you strategized my future without consulting me. I appended another service to the Haven Community. Thanks to you, it will be the finest community of its kind in the entire nation. Nathan ultimately spoke. Elizabeth, I didn't know about any of this. I presumed this was simply a normal family assembly. I know, Nathan. That's why you're not in legal difficulty. But I indicated to my 3 black-hearted offspring. They are going to confront the complete consequences of their actions. Mr. Harrison collected the floor. Attempting to defraud a senior citizen is a federal crime. Forging records is another federal crime. Conspiring to have someone declared incompetent without medical grounds is yet another. We're articulating about multiple charges that could result in several years in imprisonment. You can't do this to us, Mark exploded, standing up abruptly. We're your family. We're your offspring. Exactly, I replied, my tone icy. You are my offspring, and that makes your treachery infinitely more painful and more unforgivable. I walked up to Mark until I was standing right before him, forcing him to observe me in the vision. I provided you a university education that cost $80,000.
I assisted you with the down payment on your initial residence, $50,000. I lent you currency for your commerce that you never repaid, $30,000. I provided you my unconditional affection for 45 years, and this is how you repay me. I compensated the medical bills when your offspring had leukemia, $100,000. I assisted you through your divorce, $40,000 in legal fees. I permitted you to reside in my residence for 2 years when you lost your occupation. I provided you my emotional support when no one else believed in you, and this is how you repay me. Ultimately, I confronted Rachel. I welcomed you as a daughter when you married Kevin. I defended you when the rest of the family criticized you. I included you in my testament when you weren't even my blood. I treated you with more affection and regard than your own parents provided you, and this is how you repay me. Tears streamed down my countenance, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation from a woman ultimately permitting herself to sense all the rage she had been holding back. For months, I permitted you to make me sense useless. I feigned bewilderment when you wanted me to be bewildered. I acted like the vulnerable elderly woman you required me to be to justify your strategies, but it was all an act. It was all a test. A test you failed spectacularly, Mr. Harrison appended. Sarah placed the final record on the table. My genuine testament, the one that genuinely mattered. This is my genuine testament, I announced. It was drafted 3 years prior, and updated 6 months prior when your strategies became more obvious. Mark attempted to get closer to read it, but Mr. Harrison blocked him. In this testament, I persisted. Mark inherits $5,000. Kevin inherits $5,000. Rachel inherits nothing because legally she is not my family, and she has proven that emotionally she isn't either. $5,000? Kevin shouted. That's impossible. We're your only offspring. The rest of my estate, I went on relentlessly. $4,990,000 will be divided between the Haven community, 3 charities that protect senior citizens, and Sarah, who has shown more loyalty in 30 years of friendship than you have in a lifetime of being my offspring. Rachel started to cry, but her tears no longer moved me. Mark slammed his fist on the table in frustration. Kevin sank into his chair as if he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. But there is a method, I stated ultimately, observing them cling to this final shred of hope. What method? Mark inquired desperately. We labor to merit it. The Haven community requires administrators. It requires committed staff. It requires individuals who comprehend the worth of human respect. If you can prove over the next 5 years that you genuinely care about something more than currency, if you can prove that you comprehend the damage you caused me and are willing to repair it, then we can converse about an inheritance.
5 years, Kevin muttered. 5 years laboring without compensation at the Haven community. 5 years proving you can worth older individuals as human beings, not as impediments. 5 years proving you merit to be called my offspring. The quietness stretched for several minutes. I could see their intellects laboring, computing, evaluating options that no longer existed. And if we refuse, Rachel inquired defiantly. Mr. Harrison smiled. Then you confront the criminal charges for fraud and attempted defraudation, and you lose any possibility of an inheritance forever. It was a flawless ultimatum. Justice with the possibility of redemption, punishment with the opportunity for expansion, exactly what a mother should provide, consequences with affection, boundaries with hope. The selection is yours, I concluded. You can depart right now and never see me again, or you can remain and commence the long road to regaining my regard and your own respect. Your next statements will determine whether I still possess offspring or simply strangers who distribute my blood. The quietness stretched like an invisible web between us. I could see the gears transforming in their intellects, computing losses and gains, pride versus economic survival. It was fascinating to observe my own offspring reduce our generation's long relationship to a simple mathematical equation. Mark was the initial to articulate, his tone with contained sentiment. Mom, we never genuinely wanted to hurt you. We simply presumed that it was superior for me to be locked away needlework while you spent my currency. I interrupted. That a 76-year-old woman possessed no right to determine her own existence. It wasn't like that, Kevin protested weakly. We simply wanted to ensure you were secure. Attended to. Liar. The statements shot out of my mouth like a bullet. You wanted to ensure your financial accounts were full. The only security you were concerned with was financial. Rachel wiped her tears with the back of her hand, smudging her expensive makeup. So what are we supposed to do now? How are we supposed to survive without currency? I finished for her. The exact same method millions of individuals survive every day. By laboring, by earning a living through your own effort, instead of anticipating for someone else to die to finance your existences. Mr. Harrison had been observing silently, collecting mental notes of every reaction. Now he spoke in a professional tone. You possess 24 hours to make a choice. If you select the rehabilitation program at the Haven community, you will commence tomorrow dawn. If you select to depart, I possess orders to proceed immediately with the criminal charges. Tomorrow dawn. Mark paled, but we possess occupations, responsibilities. You possessed occupations, I corrected. Now you possess a chance at redemption that frankly you don't merit. I walked to the window, observing out at the garden I had tended for generations. The roses I had planted were still blooming, oblivious to the human drama unfolding behind them. Nature possessed that wisdom. It expanded, it flourished, it created beauty, regardless of treacheries or disappointments. Do you know what the most painful portion of all this has been? I inquired without transforming around. It wasn't discovering you strategized to rob me. It wasn't detecting you count my currency like scavengers. The most painful portion was comprehending that you never genuinely knew me. I transformed back to them, observing their bewildered countenances. For 76 years, I have been a woman who fights, who constructs, who visions. I commenced with $5,000 and transformed it into over 5 million. I constructed a property empire with no one's assistance. I navigated a commerce world dominated by men and emerged victorious. I raised 2 offspring while administering assets and making holdings. My tone rose, filled with generations of accomplishments they had systematically ignored. And you reduced me to a bewildered elderly woman who required needlework workshops. You saw me as an impediment instead of the woman who constructed everything you wanted to inherit. Sarah came over and placed a hand on my shoulder. Her presence calmed me, reminding me that not all relationships are based on convenience. Is there anything else you should know? I persisted, returning to my chair. The Haven community isn't simply a charity venture. It's my genuine legacy. It's evidence that an older woman can transform the world instead of simply anticipating for death in a chamber that smells like antiseptic. Mr. Harrison transformed the presentation on his laptop, showing the detailed strategies for the community. It was beautiful. Contemporary structures surrounded by gardens, spaces for art and music, a specialized library, medical clinics, and apartments that genuinely appeared like residences. 200 women will reside here, I explained. Women who were abandoned by greedy families. Women who lost everything in late existence divorces. Women who simply require a location to mature elderly with respect. It's impressive, admitted Nathan, who had remained quiet during the confrontation. When do you strategize to open? Construction commences in 6 weeks. The initial phase will be prepared in 18 months. And if my offspring determine to participate in their redemption, they will assist construct it. What kind of labor would we possess to do? Kevin inquired cautiously. All kinds of labor, Sarah responded before I could. Cleaning, gardening, administration, resident attention, genuine labor, honest labor, labor that will teach you the worth of serving instead of being served. But we don't know how to do that kind of labor, Rachel protested. You'll learn, I stated simply. The same method I learned to do commerce when I was your age. The same method I learned to invest in the stock market when I was 50. The same method I learned to utilize computers when I was 60. The difference is I did it for ambition and expansion. You will do it for survival and redemption. Mark stood up and commenced pacing the chamber, his hands trembling slightly. This is surreal. 2 days prior we presumed. And now, 2 days prior, you presumed you were the beneficiaries of a multi-million-dollar inheritance, I finished. Now, you know you are the protagonists of a lesson about the consequences of family treachery. And if we do it, Kevin inquired, if we labor at your community for 5 years, will you genuinely transform the testament? The inquiry I had been anticipating, the inquiry that would determine if this was justice or vengeance. If for 5 years you demonstrate that you can worth individuals for who they are instead of what they possess. If you learn to provide instead of simply collect. If you show the kind of character I had hoped I raised in you, then yes, I will modify the testament. How much? Inquired Rachel, always direct when it came to currency. Adequate for you to reside comfortably, but not adequate for you to transform back into the greedy individuals you are now. Let's state $500,000 each. 500,000. A fortune for most individuals, but only a fraction of what they had strategized to pilfer. It was adequate to reward genuine expansion, but not so much as to eliminate the necessity to maintain laboring and expanding. And the rest, Mark inquired, the rest will remain with the Haven community forever, to ensure that women like me are never again treated as burdens or inconveniences by their own families. Mr. Harrison closed his laptop with a definitive click. As I stated before, you possess 24 hours to determine. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the dawn, you either arrive at the Haven Community construction site prepared to labor, or I file the criminal charges with the district attorney's office. He stood to depart, but before he walked out he appended, and don't bother searching for other attorneys. I possess copies of all the evidence in multiple locations. This is not a negotiation, it's an ultimatum. After Mr. Harrison departed,
We sat in quietness. The weight of the choice filled the chamber like toxic smoke. Would you genuinely have us arrested? Mark inquired in a modest tone. Were you genuinely strategizing to place me in a nursing facility while you liquidated my assets? I countered. Touché. Sarah came to my side. Mrs. Anderson, are you certain you want to provide them this chance after everything they did? I'm certain, I responded, though my heart was still bleeding. Because at the end of the day they are still my offspring, and a mother never ceases hoping her offspring will become the individuals she always believed they could be. It was my final gamble, my final hope that blood could be stronger than greed. Tomorrow, I would know if I had raised offspring or strangers. The next dawn discovered me awake before sunrise, preparing coffee in the culinary space where my offspring had celebrated my supposed dementia with cheap champagne. Sarah had spent the evening in the guest chamber, and together we observed the sky transform from black to gray, anticipating to see what choice my offspring had made. Do you presume they'll arrive? Sarah inquired, dispensing coffee into the porcelain cups I had inherited from my mother. Honestly, I don't know. Portion of me hopes they do. Portion of me hopes they don't. And I'm not certain which hope is stronger. At 8 o'clock my device rang. It was Mr. Harrison. Good dawn, Elizabeth. Prepared for the initial day of instruction? As prepared as one can be to discover out if I still possess offspring or simply strangers who distribute my DNA. I've been at the site since 7 getting things prepared. The foremen have been briefed on the special situation with the new volunteers. Volunteers. An elegant method to describe individuals laboring to evade imprisonment. Any indication of them? Not yet, but there are still 2 hours to go.
Sarah and I arrived at the Haven Community Construction Site at 9:30. It was my initial occasion seeing the land since the preparation labor had commenced, and a wave of sentiment washed over me. There it was, my vision collecting physical form. Tractors moved earth where therapeutic gardens would soon expand. Laborers marked the foundations where the structures would rise, housing women who had been discarded by their own families. It's beautiful, Sarah murmured, collecting my arm as we walked the grounds. It's hope, I corrected. It's evidence that it's never too late to commence something new, to transform the world, to show that older women are not refusing to be discarded away. Mr. Harrison approached with a clipboard and a golden hard hat. Everything's prepared. If they show up, they'll commence with basic tasks. Clearing the area, organizing materials, assisting the laborers with manual labor, and if they don't, I possess an 11 o'clock appointment with the district attorney. 9:55, 9:57, 9:59. At exactly 10 o'clock, a cab extracted up to the site entrance. My heart beat so fast I presumed it would leap out of my chest. Mark got out initially, wearing vintage jeans and a t-shirt I hadn't seen in years. Kevin followed in labor clothes he had clearly acquired the evening before. Ultimately, Rachel emerged from the cab in athletic wear, her hair extracted back in a simple ponytail. They appeared vulnerable, scared, human. They walked toward us with gradual steps, like condemned prisoners heading to the gallows. When they were close adequate, I could see that none of them had rested well. Their vision were crimson, their countenances gaunt from an evening of impossible choices. "We're here," Mark stated simply. "I see that," I replied, maintaining my tone neutral, though my heart was performing emotional acrobatics. "We've determined," Kevin cleared his windpipe. "We've determined we want to attempt. We want to attempt to repair things." "Are you certain? Because once you commence, there's no transforming back. 5 complete years or you go straight to imprisonment." Rachel nodded gradually. "We're certain, or at least we're certain we don't want to go to imprisonment." It wasn't the noblest motivation, but it was a commencement. Mr. Harrison came forward with 3 extra hard hats. "Welcome to the Haven community. I'm your supervisor, and for the next 5 years, I am the most significant individual in your existences after your mother." He handed them the hard hats and a sheet with the basic rules. Labor hours are 8 o'clock a.m. to 5 o'clock p.m., 1 hour for lunch, 0 tolerance for complaints or negative attitudes. Weekly progress evaluations. Your initial direct supervisor will be David. Mr. Harrison indicated to a burly man with calloused hands and a kind grin. He possesses 30 years of construction experience and 0 patience for princesses or princes who've never labored with their hands. David came over and sized them up with the expert gaze of someone who can spot a slacker from 100 yards away. "Any of you ever done physical labor before?" he inquired. Total quietness. "Flawless," David grinned. "We'll commence with something simple. See that pile of rubble?" He indicated to a mountain of broken concrete and rusted metal. "It requires to be moved from here to over there." He indicated to a spot about 200 yards away. "By hand?" Rachel inquired in horror. "By hand," David confirmed. "Stone by stone, piece by piece. It's honest labor for individuals who require to recall the worth of effort." I observed them as they approached the pile of rubble as if it were an impossible mountain to climb. Mark lifted the initial piece of concrete and immediately winced in pain. Kevin attempted to carry too much at once and nearly fell backward. Rachel observed at her perfectly manicured hands and exhaled with the resignation of someone accepting an inevitable fate. For the next 4 hours I observed them labor. It wasn't attractive. Mark complained constantly about his back pain. Kevin halted every 10 minutes to catch his breath. Rachel broke 2 nails in the initial hour and cried silently for another 10 minutes, but they labored. At lunchtime they sat on the ground like the rest of the laborers, eating basic sandwiches and consuming lukewarm water from a distributed thermos. Their clothes were dirty, their hands stained, their countenances crimson from the sun and exertion. "How are you sensing?" I inquired, approaching them during their break. "Like we got hit by a truck," Mark mumbled, massaging his shoulders. "This is harder than we presumed," Kevin admitted. "And what did you presume? That honest labor was easy? That the individuals who construct the world with their hands do it because it's fun?" Rachel observed me with vision that for the initial occasion showed something resembling comprehension. "I never presumed about it. I never presumed about how hard it must be to earn a living like this. Now you know. And this is simply the initial day of the next 1,825. The afternoon was even harder. Their bodies weren't used to the physical labor, and every movement became more difficult. But something intriguing commenced to transpire around 3 o'clock. They commenced to assist each other. Mark carried some heavy stones that Rachel couldn't move. Kevin brought water to Mark when he saw he was getting dehydrated. Rachel discovered extra gloves for Kevin when she noticed his hands were getting raw. Modest acts of consideration they hadn't shown each other in years. At 5 o'clock sharp, David blew a whistle. "Initial day is done. Tomorrow we commence at 8 sharp. Be late and we commence over from scratch." My offspring walked toward the cab they had contacted, moving like arthritic elderly individuals. Before getting in, Mark transformed to me. "Mom, thank you for providing us this chance. I know we don't merit it. You don't merit it yet," I corrected. "But maybe in 1,824 more days you will." That evening Sarah and I had dinner in quietness, processing the day's sentiments. It had been strange to see my offspring reduced to exhausted manual laborers, but it had also been hopeful. "Do you presume they'll make it?" Sarah inquired as we washed the dishes. "I don't know, but for the initial occasion in months, I'm curious to see what kind of individuals they'll become if they actually complete these 5 years." I observed out the window at the stars commencing to appear in the dark sky. The hardest portion of this whole process had commenced, anticipating to see if justice could transform into redemption, if punishment could transform into expansion. 5 years to discover out if I still possessed offspring or if I had ultimately discovered the strength to create something more valuable, a family constructed on mutual regard instead of convenience. Time would tell. 4.5 years had transpired since that initial day of rubble and tears. The Haven community was no longer simply a vision on architectural blueprints. It was a vibrant reality with 200 women residing complete and dignified existences within its partitions. I walked through the gardens my offspring had assisted plant, observing residents participate in painting workshops, book clubs, and adapted yoga sessions. The scent of roses and jasmine filled the atmosphere, mingling with the sound of laughter coming from the creative workshop area. Mrs. Anderson greeted Victoria, an 80-year-old woman who had arrived to the community after her family declared her too expensive to maintain. Now she ran our oral history program, assisting other residents document their existences for future generations. "Good dawn, Victoria. How is the memoir venture going?" "Incredible. We possess 50 complete narratives already. Women who were nurses during conflicts, teachers who educated entire generations, mothers who raised 10 offspring while laboring in factories, narratives that were about to be lost forever." This was exactly what I had envisioned. A location where older women were not seen as burdens, but as living libraries of wisdom and experience. "Have you seen Mark this dawn?" I inquired. "He's in the culinary space assisting with the special breakfast for Patricia. She's transforming 90 today. Mark in the culinary space." If someone had informed me 5 years prior that my offspring would be preparing breakfast to celebrate the births of elderly women, I would have chuckled until I cried. Now it was simply portion of who he had become. I discovered him decorating a cake with the concentration of an artist. His hands, now calloused from years of manual labor, handled the piping bag with surprising delicacy. 90 pink roses or 90 blue roses, he inquired without observing up, clearly knowing it was me who had entered. "Definitely pink," Patricia states. "Blue reminds her too much of hospitals. Pink it is." Then he persisted, decorating, appending modest frosting flowers with a patience he had never shown in his previous existence. "You know, Patricia informed me yesterday she was one of the initial female accountants in her municipality. She administered the finances for 3 large corporations back when women could barely open a financial account without their husband's permission. And what do you presume of that? Mark ultimately observed me, his vision showing a depth that hadn't been there 5 years prior. I presume I was an idiot for believing that age determined an individual's worth. Patricia knows more about finance than I ever did after 40 years in commerce. It was an acknowledgement not simply of his mistake with me, but of his fundamental misunderstanding of what it signifies to mature elderly. Where are Kevin and Rachel? Kevin is in physical therapy with Isabella, assisting her with her rehabilitation exercises. Rachel is in the beauty salon. The beauty salon had been Rachel's idea during her 2nd year. She had noticed how many residents became depressed after losing access to basic grooming, so she had proposed creating a space where they could maintain their personal respect. Now she administered a modest salon where the women got their hair done, received adapted manicures, and sensed beautiful regardless of age. I walked to the salon and discovered Rachel gently massaging the arthritic hands of a woman I identified as Dorothy, a former professor who had arrived to the community after her daughter abandoned her in a public hospital. "Does that hurt?" Rachel inquired with genuine concern. "Not at all, dear. Your hands are magic. My fingers haven't sensed this good in years." Rachel had transformed physically over the years. She no longer wore excessive makeup or designer clothes. Her beauty was more natural now, more authentic, but the most noticeable transformation was in her vision. Where there was once greed, there was now compassion. "Mrs. Anderson," she greeted me when she saw me. "Are you here to see the new hand treatment I developed for arthritis?" "I arrived to see you," I responded honestly. She blushed slightly. Over the years she had learned to worth recognition for her labor, not for her ability to manipulate situations. "Can I converse to you for a moment?" She finished Dorothy's treatment, and we went out to the garden. We sat on a bench overlooking the entire complex. It was my favorite location to reflect, where I could see the fruit of generations of visions transformed into reality. "How do you sense?" I inquired. "Tired," she admitted. "But it's a different kind of tired. Before I was tired of feigning to be someone I wasn't. Now I'm tired from laboring hard, but I rest better than ever. Do you regret anything?" Rachel was silent for several minutes, observing a group of residents practicing Tai Chi on the lawn. "I regret being so blind," she ultimately responded. "I regret seeing only the currency instead of the extraordinary woman who had earned it. I regret attempting to pilfer instead of attempting to learn." They were statements I had anticipated years to detect, but now that I detected them, I comprehended I no longer required them. Her transformation had made them unnecessary. "And what have you learned?" "That regard isn't inherited. It's earned. That age brings wisdom, not incompetence. That attending to others is more satisfying than being attended to by others." She paused. "And that you weren't simply my rich mother-in-law. You were an example of what a woman can achieve if she doesn't accept limitations." Those final statements hit me like a ray of sunshine after years of storm. Kevin came running from the rehabilitation area, clearly excited. "Mom," Isabella walked 10 steps without assistance. 10 whole steps. My youngest offspring, who once couldn't show genuine sentiment for anything that wasn't currency, was beaming over the physical progress of an 85-year-old woman who wasn't even his relative. "She states she wants to walk to her rose garden next week," Kevin persisted, breathless from running and excitement. "Can you envision? 6 months prior, she could barely sit up without assistance. And what are you going to do to assist her achieve that?" "I already spoke with the physical therapist. We're going to create a special strengthening program. I'll be with her for every session." He halted, comprehending what he had stated. "If that's okay with you." "Of course." It was the initial occasion in years he had inquired my permission for something that clearly mattered to him for the correct reasons. "That sounds flawless, Kevin." That afternoon, Mr. Harrison arrived to visit for our monthly review assembly. We sat in my office at the community, surrounded by photographs of residents, certificates of recognition, and letters from grateful families. "How do you evaluate them?" he inquired, examining his notes from the past few months. "They've transformed in methods I didn't presume possible," I admitted, "not simply in their labor here, but in who they are as individuals. Do you presume it's genuine, or are they acting to impress you?" It was the inquiry I had inquired myself for months. Initially they were definitely acting, but there's something about the labor here about attending to others that reveals an individual's genuine character. You can't fabricate compassion for 4.5 years. So I presume my offspring have discovered versions of themselves they didn't know existed, versions that I like much more than the individuals they were before. Mr. Harrison smiled. "And the testament? The testament can anticipate another 6 months. I want to see how they handle the final choice." "What final choice?"
In 6 months, their mandatory period ends. They will be free to depart and reside their existences as they wish. The genuine inquiry is, will they remain because they want to be here, or will they depart because they've served their sentence? It was the ultimate test. Anyone can transform temporarily when they possess no options. Genuine character is revealed when the options return. And if they depart, then I'll know I did the correct thing by transforming my testament. And if they remain, then I'll know I've ultimately gotten my offspring back. That evening, I had dinner with Sarah in the community's communal eating chamber, surrounded by the sound of cheerful conversations and laughter from women who had discovered a new family in their golden years. "Are you nervous about the next 6 months?" Sarah inquired. "Curious," I corrected. "After 76 years of existence, I've learned that the finest surprises arrive when you ultimately cease attempting to dominate the outcome." 6 months later, the day I had been anticipating for 5 years ultimately arrived. It was a flawless spring dawn, the sun filtering through the blinds of my office as I examined the records Mr. Harrison had prepared for this special occasion. The modified testament lay on my desk, sealed in an envelope that contained the final choice about my offspring's future. But initially, I possessed to know what choice they had made. At 10 o'clock in the dawn, Mark, Kevin, and Rachel arrived at my office adorned in their usual labor clothes. Over 5 years, I had learned to read their emotional states by the method they walked, and today they appeared serene, determined. "Good dawn," I stated, motioning for them to sit. "Do you know why you're here?" "Because today marks exactly 5 years since we commenced laboring here," Mark responded, "and according to our agreement, today we are free to go." "Exactly. Your legal obligation has ended. You no longer confront criminal charges. You are no longer necessitated to be here. You are completely free." The quietness stretched for several minutes. I could see they had prepared for this moment, that they had discussed among themselves what they would state. "We've made a choice." Rachel ultimately spoke, her tone firm but filled with sentiment. "I'm listening." Kevin cleared his windpipe. "We want to remain, not because we possess to, but because we want to." My heart halted for a moment, but I maintained my expression neutral. "Why?" "Because this location has become our residence," Mark responded. "Because these women have become our extended family. Because the labor we do here is the most significant labor we've ever done in our existences. And because," Rachel appended, tears commencing to form in her vision, "we ultimately comprehend what you attempted to teach us from the commencement, that existence isn't about what you can collect, but what you can provide." I stood up and walked to the window overlooking the gardens. I could see Isabella walking gradually, but purposefully toward her favorite roses, exactly as Kevin had promised she would. I could see Patricia teaching basic mathematics to a group of younger women who had recently arrived at the community. "And what about your existences outside of here? Your careers, your personal strategies?" "Our careers are here now," Kevin stated. "I've been studying geriatric physical therapy at evening. I want to be officially certified to superior assist the residents. I enrolled in courses on the psychology of aging," Rachel appended. "I want to superior comprehend how to assist the women who arrive here depressed and scared." "And I," Mark stated, "possess been laboring with Mr. Harrison to learn about nonprofit administration. I want to ensure this location runs flawlessly for generations to arrive. I had raised businessmen and they had ultimately become social entrepreneurs." "There's something else," Mark persisted. "We've been conversing among ourselves and we want to make a formal proposal." "What kind of proposal?" "We want to officially renounce any inheritance," Rachel stated. "We want all of your currency to remain here at the Haven community forever." I transformed to them, genuinely surprised for the initial occasion in years. "Are you certain about what you're articulating?"
"Completely certain," Kevin responded. "For 5 years we've seen what well-utilized currency can accomplish. We've seen how this location transforms existences, how it provides respect to women who had lost all hope. We don't want to be heirs to your fortune. We want to be guardians of your legacy." The tears I had been holding back for 5 years ultimately broke free. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a pride so deep it ached in my chest. "Do you know what this signifies?" I splur. "It signifies we'll labor here for the rest of our existences for modest salaries," Mark stated. "It signifies we'll never be rich, but we'll be portion of something more significant than currency. It signifies," Rachel appended, "that we will ultimately be worthy of being called your offspring." I walked to my desk and collected the envelope containing the modified testament. With deliberate movements, I tore it into pieces before them. "What are you doing?" Kevin inquired, bewildered. "That testament provided you $500,000 each if you completed the 5 years. But you possess simply proven that you no longer require my currency to be the individuals I always hoped you would be." I extracted another record from my drawer, the testament I had drafted the week before, after months of observing their genuine transformation. "This is my genuine testament," I announced. In it, Mark is designated executive director of the Haven community with a respectable but not extravagant salary. Kevin is designated Director of Rehabilitation Programs. Rachel is designated Director of Emotional Wellness and Creative Programs. Their vision widened in surprise. The rest of my estate, I persisted. $4.8 million is designated to create a network of similar communities across the nation. The three of you will lead that expansion, ensuring that no older woman in this nation possesses to suffer what I was about to suffer. A network, Mark murmured. 10 communities in the next 15 years, each one run by individuals who comprehend that attending to our elders isn't charity, it's justice. The three of them stood up at the identical occasion and embraced me with an intensity I hadn't sensed since they were offspring. But it was different now. Now it was the embrace of adults who had earned the right to affection and be loved. Why? Rachel inquired through her tears. After everything we did to you, why are you providing us this opportunity? Because you are no longer the individuals who betrayed me, I responded simply. You are the individuals I always believed you could become. You simply required time to discover yourselves. That afternoon, we held an assembly with all the community's residents to announce the transformations. The conference chamber filled with curious and excited women, many of whom had developed genuine relationships with my offspring over the years. I possess the honor of announcing, I stated from the impromptu podium, that the Haven community will not only persist to operate indefinitely, but will expand to assist thousands more women. The applause was deafening. And I possess the even greater honor of announcing that my offspring, Mark, Kevin, and Rachel, have selected to dedicate their existences to this mission. Isabella stood up gradually, leaning on her cane. Mrs. Anderson, may I state something? Of course, Isabella. Your offspring arrived here as a punishment, but they are departing as a blessing. They attended to us when we were sick. They comforted us when we were sad. They celebrated with us when we were happy. I don't know what kind of mother one possesses to be to raise offspring who can transform so much, but you are an example to us all. That evening I had dinner with my offspring and Sarah in the communal eating chamber. It was the initial occasion in 5 years that we were together as a genuine family. Not as supervisor and employees, not as victim and perpetrators, but as individuals who loved and regarded each other. What are you going to do now? Sarah inquired. Now Mark responded. We're going to transform the method this nation treats its senior citizens. We're going to ensure, Kevin appended, that no woman possesses to select between respect and security in her elderly age. And we're going to prove, Rachel concluded, that a family can be reconstructed on a foundation of regard instead of convenience. After dinner, I went out to the principal garden alone. It was my nightly ritual to walk among the flowers we had planted and reflect on the day. But tonight was different. Tonight I could ultimately rest. At 76, I had achieved something few mothers ever do. Not simply raising successful offspring, but transforming lost offspring into extraordinary human beings. The legacy I would depart would not be measured in dollars or assets. It would be measured in transformed existences, in restored respect, in affection that had been transformed into action. I observed up at the stars shining over the Haven community, and recalled the statements Thomas had written to me in one of his final letters. The genuine legacy is not a monument, it's a map. He was correct. I had created a map for other families to discover their method back to affection. A map that my offspring would now carry to thousands more women. Vengeance had become redemption. Justice had become grace. And I, a woman who had been on the verge of being buried alive by her own family, had discovered a method to resurrect not only my own existence, but the existences of everyone around me. It was ultimately the kind of legacy worth leaving. Thank you for reading this story of transformation and redemption. If you enjoyed this journey from betrayal to forgiveness, please subscribe to stay updated with more inspiring stories. What would you have done if you were in Elizabeth's situation? Would you have given your children a second chance, or would you have pursued a different path? Share your thoughts in the comments below.